Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share, and restack buttons. Well, will this immediately trigger a global financial crisis? Is there a concerted effort to undermine the dollar? We'll talk about that in just a moment, but first I want to turn your attention to this right here. So if you missed it on Wednesday, we had a live prophecy roundtable. It included myself, John Haller, Patrick Wood, and Scott Townsend. Pastor Tom Hughes was supposed to join us, but unfortunately he lost access to power and internet due to high winds in the area he was in. So he did not join us, but we had a very fruitful discussion about technology, AI, quantum computing, a lot of the exponential advances that are taking place right now and how they relate to the end times. So if you missed that, didn't get a chance to see it, just head on over to the live tab on the YouTube page. There's also a link on the Substack under the interviews tab. And I will pin a link to this at the top of the comments so you can check it out. Also, yesterday, I appeared on the Stand Up for Truth podcast with Mary Danielson, where we talked about bubbles in the stock market, the global economy, and implications for the end times as well. So if you missed that, if you didn't know about that, I'll also post a link to that at the top of the comments, pin that at the top of the comments, and you can go check that out as well. So what are we talking about? Will this immediately trigger a global financial crisis? Is there an effort to undermine the US dollar? Now, there's been talk on the internet for a couple of years now about something called Operation Sandman, which involves over 100 different nations coordinating with each other in order to dump U.S. treasuries on the market, sell all their U.S. debt on the same day in order to create problems for the United States. Is this likely? What would this do? Would this trigger a global financial crisis? First, it's hard to say that it would, because again, the Federal Reserve, remember, can print dollars at will to buy all those treasuries if they want, and that's one of the things that they are most keen to do, is to make sure that the treasury market is functioning and liquid, and that the buying and selling of treasuries happens in an orderly fashion. I find this very highly unlikely for a couple of reasons. One is, over 100 nations coordinating this, engaged in this conspiracy and keeping it a secret would be very difficult. Not impossible, but very difficult. And number two, there's no clear advantage to these other countries to do this. There is a coordinated effort to move from the dollar, but it's to the advantage of these companies not to dump their treasuries at a loss, but to slowly sell them off, which we've seen countries like China doing for 10 years now, well over a decade, selling those off at market prices and accumulating gold in its place. So I would say no, this specific scenario, Operation Sandman, will not trigger a global financial crisis. However, there is a concerted effort to dump the dollar, and we read about that in this article. I want to read a few excerpts from this and comment on it. It's titled, East versus West, a global dollar dump is inevitable and the U.S. must prepare. And I agree, it is inevitable. We're already seeing this. We've seen the BRICS nations align together. We're seeing this push to get away from the dollar as the dominant currency used in international trade. It's not as easy as it sounds. There is no clear-cut BRICS currency that's created. However, we are seeing BRICS amass a large amount of power. We're talking about countries that include two of the three world's largest nuclear arsenals, two of the three largest oil-producing states in the world. We see control over effectively the Suez Canal and a number of other important areas of trade. And so the BRICS is a bifurcation, a threat to the U.S. global dominated financial system. And we're seeing the U.S. lose its grip on that power over the globe. So this says, in October of 2024, Russia hosted the annual BRICS summit in the city of Kazan with the intent to show unity among developing nations in general Eastern interests. The Kremlin, a target of severe NATO sanctions since the start of the war in Ukraine, has been effective in solidifying economic guarantees from BRICS partners and circumventing Western economic controls. And I would argue that that's something that not just Russia wants to do in the aftermath of Ukraine, but all these countries that have found themselves in the crosshairs of the United States, or who have seen other countries fall in the crosshairs of the United States when it comes to these sanctions regimes and kicking nations out of SWIFT, threatening military action. And they see that and they say, well, what happens when I get on the wrong side of the United States? So that's why they're quick to join this coalition. It says, despite being removed from the SWIFT banking system network and being cut off from a large percentage of global trade, Russia has continued to garner solid export revenues. We certainly aren't seeing the total collapse of the Russian economy that so many media experts predicted. The reason? Russia is resource rich, and in an inflationary environment, countries that are heavy in commodities, sold at lower prices, are always sought after. The BRICS event this year was a reminder that the West financial influence is in decline. And what he said there is just true, but I would add that more and more countries are willing to just ignore the United States and say, we're not going to do that. And so this power and influence by the United States clearly is waning. And that's what we would expect to see in the end times. There's no mention when we read end times Bible prophecy of the United States being a major player on the world scene. It says at that same meeting, Putin called for an alternative international payment system and passed around a mock-up of what he called a BRICS banknote. The paper note was purely symbolic, but its presence at the summit started an uproar within the establishment media. Pundits were quick to fact-check the story and declare that this was not a real unified currency announcement. As far as I know, no one said it was. What we did say, however, is that a real multilateral currency system cutting out the dollar is much closer than most people realize. Putin flashed that banknote around because this is something the BRICS have been working on for well over a decade. Those cynics that think such a thing is impossible are living in denial, or they have an agenda to peddle. Donald Trump in particular seems to understand quite well that the BRICS currency concept is not a bluff or a joke. In a recent social media post, Trump threatened to increase tariffs for any nation that tries to diminish or replace the dollar's world reserve status. The dollar is the premier currency used in the vast majority of international transactions. Putin responded with a warning that Trump's efforts to reinforce the dollar would backfire. And I would agree, to a large degree, this is again why we're seeing this move to threaten economic warfare. We're going to increase tariffs, or we're going to cut you out of the SWIFT system, or we're going to institute sanctions on your country and isolate you. Eventually, when you do this to the whole world, you become the one that is isolated, because if you've cut everybody else out and they all join together, well, it turns out you're left alone, and that's where the United States is heading. It says, overall, Putin is right. Any move to force the dollar onto developing nations as a reserve currency will only result in them dumping it faster. Tariffs act as leverage for short-term adjustments to trade imbalances, but they aren't going to be effective in preventing other countries from using alternative currencies. And that's true. Again, these countries, they're moving away from the dollar and wish to move away from the dollar precisely because of these economic threats that they've been receiving from the United States over the past really several decades. So let's scroll down a little bit more. And we get to this point. It says, that said, we haven't experienced any catastrophic economic disruptions yet. The loss of the dollar's reserve status would bring historically devastating consequences, at least in the short term. And that's only if our country devises a plan to weather the storm, which I don't think they have a plan B. Plan A is to threaten and force the dollar on the world. It's not working out so well. It says conflicts between East and West are only going to grow given the existing conditions, and the calls for a dollar alternative are going to continue. There's not much Trump can do about that. We also have to keep in mind that there are globalist institutions like the IMF and the BIS, that's the International Monetary Fund, and the Bank of International Settlements, that are, as I write this, getting ready to introduce central bank digital currencies and cashless systems that would limit the dollar's global influence by default. When globalists pontificated endlessly about a great reset during the pandemic era, what they were talking about was primarily an economic reset and a currency reset. Klaus Schwab stated, "Now is the time for a great reset of capitalism." And this event was supposed to precede a global shift into a cashless system. There can't be a global currency reset without the dollar being demoted. And guys, we know the Bible says there is. Again, the Bible does not mention the United States as a major power on the world scene, a major player on the world scene in the end times. Yet we know this mark of the beast system is global in nature. That means the dollar must be demoted. I don't believe that, I guess it could be co-opted and become the top of that beast system, but it's highly unlikely. This goes on. It says there can't be a reset without a reversal of the old Bretton Woods system. That was the system that was put in place during World War II in 1944. The Allies met at a place called Bretton Woods, and they determined that the dollar would be the world's reserve currency, convertible into gold by other nations. And of course, that ended in 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window temporarily. Right, here we are 50 plus years later, it's still temporarily closed. He effectively severed the link between gold and the dollar forever, and we've seen the dollar lose 98% of its purchasing power since then. We've seen it that's why we've seen runaway inflation since the 70s. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower, but we've seen constant inflation since 1971. He says they know it, and they aren't going to warn the rest of the public about the consequences. Everything is working against the dollar right now, and there's a lot of people out there that question if it's even worth saving. The Federal Reserve has been the source of considerable corruption within our government. I've often referred to central bankers as economic suicide bombers. Again, this is the author of the article saying this. But the dollar is all we have until a tangible safety net can be established. So again, we've talked about once this current monetary system comes to an end, they have the replacement waiting in the wings. It's central bank digital currency, tokenized assets, digital IDs, and they will roll that out. But first, the current system has to die, right? To build back better, you have to destroy what once was. Otherwise, what are you building back? And so that's what we're seeing take place. We're in the midst of this process. It says at bottom, it's impossible to keep the dollar in a position of global dominance when every element of geopolitics is working against it, and the very globalist organizations that helped create the Bretton Woods system are now trying to dismantle it. So, guys, we are in a period where we're seeing this transition away from the dollar. We're seeing the end of the current global monetary system. Mike Maloney, he's studied these in the past, and I believe he had stated the average duration for a global monetary system is about 40 years. So if you recall, prior to Bretton Woods, we had this interregnum period between World War I and Bretton Woods, but prior to that, it was the British pound that was the world's global reserve currency. So we see these shifts throughout time, and now we are at the end of the useful life of this current monetary system, and it means the dollar, as we know it, is going to go away as the world's reserve currency. Now, some would say, well, how is that going to happen? What's going to replace it? Is there some BRICS note? No. I believe temporarily it's gold. We're seeing countries, central banks all around the world accumulating physical gold more as the world's reserve asset. We're still seeing a lot of use of dollars. We're seeing countries getting rid of their U.S. Treasury holdings and replacing that with gold, because gold can't simply be printed by a counterparty, by another government, thus devaluing your holdings. And so we're seeing this move toward gold. But is there some aspect of this that could immediately trigger a global financial meltdown? And I believe there is, and counterintuitively, it's not the collapse of the dollar's purchasing power, but actually the collapse of the dollar system as a result of the dollar appreciating in value relative to all the other fiat currencies. Meaning, I believe we're coming upon a time very soon where we're going to see the dollar rise relative to all the other currencies in the world at a fast pace that does trigger an immediate financial crisis. Again, I believe we're in a global depression right now. As we see that depression take hold in other places around the world, we see it has a severe hold on China right now. Germany is under pressure from this. As we see this spread across the world, even in the United States, what you see is a shrinking of the currency supply as people default on their debts, as they go delinquent on their mortgages, their credit cards, their car loans, whatever it may be, as corporations go bankrupt and can't pay back their debts, as government entities, municipalities, states, provinces, even national governments declare bankruptcy and default on their debt. That actually shrinks the currency supply, which makes the purchasing power go up. And in such an environment, in a massive financial crisis like the one we, I believe, are in right now, it's just not readily apparent to everybody, but soon will be, people will seek all around the world what they think is the relative safety of the dollar, and we'll actually see people clamoring for dollars at the same time that this deflationary collapse leads to a shrinking of the number of dollars. So we could see this upward pressure and price appreciation of the dollar, which itself would trigger a financial crisis all throughout the global markets because of this shift and change. It would impact all of these different derivatives, have all these second order effects, and we would see contagion ripple throughout the financial system, particularly as we see Japan going into a currency crisis. So yes, guys, I believe this could immediately trigger a financial crisis, but it's not the dollar going away, although the dollar has its problems, but actually the dollar appreciating before, because long term, I see the government solution that they will propose is to print dollars and hand them out to everyone. And when they do that, that will be really the last dying days of fiat currency around the globe. And as those fiat currencies collapse, that's when we'll see them roll out this new system and say, we have to start over from scratch. Here we're going to use these digital currencies and tokenized assets. In order to protect them and to know that you are you, you have to have this digital ID. So guys, this is going to be a slow process of death for the dollar. It reminds me of this quote. We hear this mentioned a lot. This is from Ernest Hemingway. I believe it's from The Sun Also Rises. We had one character asked, "How did you go bankrupt?" And the response was, 2 ways, gradually, and then suddenly. So we've seen this gradual decline in the value of the dollar since 1971. There will come a time where suddenly it becomes worthless. But I think in between where we are now and when we get to that point, we will actually see the dollar appreciate in value relative to the other currencies on the globe, but not relative to gold, but relative to the other currencies on Earth. Maybe even within the deflationary spiral, the initial aspects probably relative to gold. We'll have to see. We'll have to see how that plays out. But guys, this is going to be quite an experience if we are here on Earth to see any of this, because again, this is going to be the greatest financial crisis the world has ever seen. Now, is there something else that could immediately trigger a financial meltdown? I believe there's also one other event that's a certain event that will, even if we've already had a financial meltdown. And guys, that is the rapture of the church. The rapture of the church occurs. I believe that will create a cascading ripple effect throughout all the world, through society, through financial systems. It will impact the world like very few events ever have. And guys, we are approaching that time because Jesus and the prophets said there were certain signs of the second coming that we should be looking for. We've been over those numerous times. Went over that in yesterday's video. And Jesus said, when you begin to see these things, you know that I'm near, right at the door. Well, he's talking about the coming of his second coming at the end of the tribulation. And we are not in the tribulation right now. I believe the rapture of the church takes place before the tribulation. So if that's the case, and we already see all of these signs, that tells us how close the tribulation is. That means the rapture of the church is even closer than that. So guys, we are on the cusp of seeing major events take place all around the world. So make sure that you are anchored in the Word of God, that your life is built upon the solid foundation, the rock that is Jesus Christ, our Messiah, our Savior, because there are storms coming, and those who have built their lives on the shifting sands of this world, well, they're going to have their houses destroyed. They're going to have their worlds turned upside down. Those of us who have built our lives on Christ, who can have the peace that only He gives us through all of that, we need to be ready and prepared to share the good news, to share the hope we have in Jesus Christ with those who are in turmoil, who have lost so much, who are looking around with their whole world has been changed. As they're going to be looking for answers, we need to be prepared to provide those answers. We need to be prepared every day to do that to everyone we meet, to share the good news of Jesus Christ. So take advantage of whatever time we have left, guys. I believe the days are short. So let's make sure that we're busy carrying out the work of the Lord, busy serving one another. Let me know what you think. Maybe you think, nope, that's insane that the dollar would actually appreciate in value. And it's also insane to think that that would not be a good thing, because most people after these years of inflation would say that would be a good thing, but depends, really. Everybody's situation is going to be different, but let me know what you think in the comments. Leave your comments below. Make sure to hit the like, share, subscribe buttons. God willing, I will see you on Monday. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to visit my Substack at brittgillette.substack.com. There you'll find my latest videos and articles, as well as notes, where I share the latest news headlines, the articles I'm reading, and the videos I'm watching. Subscribe for free, and each new post on Substack will be sent directly to your email. Just scroll to the bottom of the homepage and hit the subscribe button. As an added bonus, your first welcome email will include a link to a copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.